Yesterday, Professor Chinua Achebe turned 82. Until a few weeks ago, the man often called the godfather of African literature was well known for his 1958 novel, Things Fall Apart. But that has changed. He's now mainly associated with his memoir, There Was a Country, a personal history of Biafra. Memoir has been described as how one remembers a section of one's life and not an outcome of one's whole life. Did Achebe accomplish that in There Was a Country? Did he give us an insight into Biafra? Raymond Carver said, "What good is insight? It makes things worse." Some Nigerians seem to agree and prefer that we leave the Biafran story alone. Today, on this special edition of the Roundtable, we are not going to leave the Biafran story alone. We are going to explore Achebe's take on it with the help of three distinguished scholars of African literature. We have E.C. Ejiogu. He's a senior researcher in the Center of Africa Studies, University of the Free State in South Africa. Mr. Ejiogu, welcome to SaharaTV. We also have Dr. Anya. He's a public health consultant and teaches at Imperial College, London. He's joining us from South Africa. Dr. Anya, welcome to SaharaTV.
Thank you very much, Rudolph.
And also joining us from Maryland is a respected critic and a writer, Ikheloa. Ikhide, welcome to SaharaTV.
Hi, Rudolph. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that mess of your name. Let me start with you, Dr. Anya.
Yes.
You wrote in your review of the memoir that tears ran down your cheeks after you watched a rough cut of the screening of the Half of a Yellow Sun, the movie on the book Half of a Yellow Sun. I'm wondering, where did that emotion come from?
I mean, I think it's a deep emotion that comes from the history of my family. You know, I was born just after the Civil War ended. My family is Igbo, and you know, my grandparents and my parents lived through the war. And you know, throughout my childhood, there were stories of my parents, you know, having to flee from Nsukka, where they were teaching as young lecturers, and then they had to move to different places, and you know, each time. And so you know, my grandmother would, when she came to visit, you know, when I was 5, she would tell me the stories of having to hide my aunts from soldiers who were looking for young women. You know, and I was quite young when I was hearing these stories. So I think, you know, it's a mixture of all those, you know, the story of Half of a Yellow Sun, the story of Biafra is very personal to me. And, you know, to be honest, I was surprised when I started crying as well at the end of the film. So I think it's also something deep that we don't realize we carry with us.
Ikhide, when you got this book, what were your expectations, and were they met when you finished reading it?
Yeah, well, I have been a student of Chinua Achebe for as long as I remember. And I actually bought the book out of curiosity. I did not mean to read it. I ended up reading it. I think that the book exceeded my expectations. I enjoyed reading the book, which is interesting because those who have studied Achebe will recognize several passages of the book in previous works of his. If you've read his essays, a lot of them. A lot of what he has to say in the memoir has already been said. What I found interesting was that it is really.
Go ahead.
More, the memoir is Biafra. It is about a wide-ranging set of issues, not only about Biafra, about Nigeria, about the role of the writer. in societies in Africa. And so many, the pieces that spoke to me actually in the book go beyond Biafra.
Exactly. Let me come to you.
Those spoke to me.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought. Yeah. Sorry. Finish your thought.
So those spoke to me. I think that an excellent job of telling a story based on several over the years. It is quite interesting to me, again, what actions were. It tells me that it's a good thing, I think. There is a hunger for these kinds of works. There's also a part that saddens me that not many people, including very respected friends of mine in the intellectual world, who are not reading as much as they should read.
Okay, thank you so much. Isi, let me come to you because we are talking about a story that started with Nigeria, the dream country that got independence, that a generation, the middle class, were expecting a kind of country that didn't materialize. What did you take out of that change, that pivotal change from the dream of that country to the point where the crisis started? What is your take when you were reading that section of the book?
Well, there is nothing much new there. We know.
Couldn't hear the last. I couldn't hear the last part of your question very well. Could you please repeat?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was asking you, what is your take about how the country transformed from being a promising nation that Achebe's generation were expecting to when it became a country in crisis?
I mean, as a matter of fact, the book to me is not of literature. It was, it affirmed what I found out in the course of researching the book I did that was just published on Nigeria, that's The Roots of Political Instability in Nigeria. It was published last year by Ashgate. So Achebe's book kind of reaffirmed to me what I found in the course of researching that book. I think it took me about 7 years to research that book. What you just mentioned, that this was an entity that some of the nationalities that were cobbled together to constitute it, particularly the Igbo, for instance, took as if it was something that they were going to make something out of. But circumstances which were not through their own making dashed all of that by way of. So the book to me was a reaffirmation of what I found. I am not.
I think we're having an audio problem with EC's. This
British cobbled together and called Nigeria. It's exactly the same way I feel about it today. I am so deep from it that I do not even acknowledge it as a reality because it's not a reality.
Now, Ike, let me come to you. So what are the surprises you noticed in the book? Are there any?
I suppose the surprise for me was that he was as frank and didn't pull any punches. Achebe has a reputation for speaking out, but also has had a reputation for being quite measured. And so I felt, this was, bottled up feelings of over a year in a man, of 82, feeling that, I've got to say this because I have very little time left. And so I think that was my, it's not so much a surprise, but I sort of thought, gosh, he's really put it all out there the way he feels it. And I could recognize in some of what he put out there some of the feelings that I had heard from, my grandparents and other members of my family. So I think he did what he said in the title. It's a personal history of Biafra, his personal history, and that's what he's done.
Ikhide, let me
Yes.
ask you, were you surprised by the reaction the book received, even from people who obviously confess that they've not read it?
Actually, I was surprised that it was not more intense. I fully expected the visceral reaction along certain lines, and so and a lot of it was predictable. So I guess some of it is because I've been in this for a very long time, and several of the combatants I am very familiar with. I would have been surprised if they had gone somewhere else. I think that what surprised me was that the book is the first book I've ever heard about that was reviewed without anybody reading it. Many of folks had the book. They wrote up to 3,000-4,000 words on the book. And so one of the challenges was telling people, well, you first have to read the book and back with an informed opinion based on facts. I think that surprise is not a strong word. For me, I was sad because the world has changed. The world is changing very fast. And we have to look at the world from a different set of lenses. There is the cliche globalized. I think Africa is being changed with great muscle by the forces of technology and other forces beyond our control. And so the whole notion of looking at Achebe's book from a purely ethnic perspective is dishonest. I think that I was surprised also that many people expected him to be quote unquote objective. He was a victim of a genocide, and that's the other thing. I firmly believe in my heart that what happened to the Igbo was a genocide, and then we can talk about how it happened, why it happened, and based on that fact. I am not going to sit with someone who says to me, well, 1 million people, 2 million people, 3 million people died because they were starved to death. I don't think it's genocide. That's just silly. So we had in several forums people making the silly argument that this was not a genocide. We cannot move forward on a platform of lies and denial. And that was but for me, that's not new. I've been on the internet, I suspect, since 1993, and we've been having these battles. I think that Professor Achebe's perspective, it's an honest perspective told from his experience. There are so many other perspectives out there. I will say this: Biafra is probably one of the most researched wars I've ever come across, bar none. I mean, there are about 100 and something book references that I have somewhere from various perspectives, the Igbo perspective, the minority perspective. My view is if you are not happy with Professor Achebe's response, go write your own. I am a minority myself, as you probably know. I'm from what is now called Edo State. We started out with the Midwest region, Midwest State, Bendel State, now Edo State. And I was an 8-year-old kid during the Civil War. I was in Benin City with my little brother alone when the Biafran army took over Benin City. So there's a story there. There are all kinds of stories out there, and I think it's a great thing that Professor Achebe restarted the conversation. I have never seen Nigerians this excited about a book, not in a long time. So that's a good thing that I take away from it. Like I said, I did read the book, but I was not so much fascinated by the Biafran story. I was fascinated by the other profound things he had to say about my world, about my passion, which is literature, and so on and so forth, and about our our position as people of color in the new world that we see.
Very interesting. Isi, let me ask you, what is your Biafran story, and is it does it play a role in your understanding of the book? Because it appears as if there is a divide between the people that experienced Biafra and their take on the book and the people that did not. How does that work for you?
Thank you very much. There is a notion I'd like to correct, and it seems like people lift up concepts without any regard to the reality that those concepts represent. One of such concepts is the concept of civil war. A civil war is a situation where a country, when there is a country, and the country exists when there is a consensus amongst whether peoples or whether entities that make it up. So that, in the case of the United States, you would talk about the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War. But in the case of what happened in the areas that became the areas of the Niger Basin that became Nigeria through the British, you can't call what happened between Nigeria and Biafra a civil war, because there wasn't any consensus, that brought together the peoples that were made to constitute Nigeria in the first instance. So people should not throw around the word civil war. This was a conflict between, entities, two different entities, the Biafra and then the other peoples that constituted Nigeria. So the Biafra story to me is passionate, is very personal, especially like I told you after I researched and wrote this book, The Roots of Political Instability in Nigeria. What you have in what exists today as Nigeria is a charade, is an anomaly. And as far as I'm concerned, it exists as an existential threat to particularly the Igbo. And I wasn't surprised that the reaction that Achebe's book received, particularly from certain individuals, from certain of the nationalities in what exists today as Nigeria, was so vitriolic and so denial kind of. I wasn't very surprised, because, look, the issue of the Igbo in Nigeria is an issue that cannot rest until the Igbo reassert their self-determination, because the Igbo do not belong to Nigeria. Nigeria does not want the Igbo. Nigeria just wants to have the Igbo to keep the Igbo down. And unfortunately, the Igbo cannot, and they have decided that they don't want to, from, the word go, particularly, right after the events, even before the events that led to that war. The Igbo they know full well that they don't belong to Nigeria. And the only way they can become, who they are or what they want to be is if Nigeria, that they detach from Nigeria. So what Achebe brought out in his book is what is there. But certain individuals do not want to hear it because they know that it is true. And they are perturbed. In fact, it was in the last 1 year that I researched and found out that this issue of sovereignty, once it has been declared by any group, any people, any entity, you cannot erase it unless you make the people, the group that declared it extinct.
Okay.
Any day, any time, their offspring, they can revive it and reassert it. So in the case of Biafra, that's what is worrying the other peoples in Nigeria who want to suppress and wish away the Igbo.
Okay,
so,
Isi, hold on.
As a matter of fact,
Isi, hold on there. Let me
brought to the fore once again the issue about the self-determination, state building in Africa and in the British Commonwealth. It's a reality that nobody can wish away. Some people can rant, people can get upset, some people can wax eloquent, but the reality is reality. Nigeria is a reality.
Okay, hold on. Hold on. Let me get other people involved in the
Nigeria.
Okay,
If they want to remain there,
hold on.
Want to remain there. Those are the issues, that the questions that we need to raise and we need to answer. And Achebe's book brought out those questions once again to the fore.
Okay, let me get other people involved, okay? Ike, let me ask you, because in the New York Times review of the book by Adam Nosita, he said that Achebe's judgment of contemporary Nigeria seems excessive. Is there any way to render an excessive judgment on Nigeria, knowing how far Nigeria has gone in the last 50 years?
I mean, I think part of the issue is that Nigeria is such a large and complex country, and, you know, it's something that you often see people can pick. You know, it's like that old story about, you know, the blind man and the elephant and touching different parts of the body. You know, you can look at Nigeria from all sorts of perspectives and reach, you know, different conclusions. You know, so, you know, I have friends who are extremely cynical and who look at what's going on in Nigeria today. And there is a lot, you know, to make one sad and worried and concerned. Personally, I'm more generally in my life, more of an optimist. And so I tend to look at the glass as half full rather than half empty. But, you know, I don't, with that view, I don't at the same time say to someone who says, look, your country is in a mess, I don't say to them, don't be ridiculous, it's not. Because, you know, the reality is that our country is in a mess by any objective standards of measurement. So I suppose Rothschild was probably leaning on the other side of, you know, the optimism. You know, and there is, you know, this is the longest time since independence. Nigeria has been under a civilian government. I noticed that I don't use the word democracy, I use a civilian government, but that's, you know, that's significant in itself. And I think, you know, there are things that are moving forward, there are things that are slipping back. And I think what sometimes happens is that the cheerleaders for either the cynics or the optimists aren't often generous enough to allow for the validity of the alternative view. And I think that's what I'd make of that review in relation to Achebe. I think Achebe had every right to reach the conclusions he did.
Ikhide, let me ask you, because we read in the book that the conflict between the old Igbo ways and the emerging Christian society was at the center of the seed that led to Tinsolapart, the masterpiece Tinsolapart. Now, as someone who watches the literature development in Nigeria and Africa as a whole, do you think that the conflict we are seeing between the Nigeria that emerged after the war has produced the kind of masterpiece that one will expect such a conflict to produce?
What do you mean? I mean,
did you hear me?
What do you mean? What by this masterpiece?
Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Say that again.
What do you mean by masterpiece?
Well, I mean the kind of literature, the literature that we consider high literature. I mean, I want you to look at literature that we've produced since the end of the war, and yes, maybe assess and say whether it has, you know, all the crises that we've gone through, has it been able to produce the kind of literature you would have expected, considering the kind of literature that followed the change from the traditional society to the Christian society that produced the kind of books like Tinsolapart?
I would say yes and no. I mean, I think, again, you know, when we talk about literature, we tend to look at literature or stories from the standpoint of the book. Now, when the Achebes, the Soyinkas, and so on and so forth were our stories, the book was the primary mode of conveying those thoughts. So if you look at Achebe's era and you start from Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, A Man of the People, Arrow of God, and so on and so forth, you see on this you see on the surface a very rigorous body of work. Then you go all up to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Love the Book, Half of a Yellow Sun. You see some rigor there. And then I am worried about contemporary African literature when you judge it by the book. I think that the work has been as rigorous and as thoughtful as the generation before. But then there is a reason for that, I suspect. There are other options available to us for education and entertainment. There is something called the internet. I have joked to many people that if I want to read African literature these days, I simply go on Twitter and on Facebook. And many people who don't realize they are thinkers and writers are just writing our stories. So you are probably right that when you look at the book, we have not really covered much in terms of the anxieties and the wars happening in Africa. I will also say a lot of the wars we talk about are conventional wars. We don't talk about the wars that are on us. The impact of, for instance, unbridled consumerism on the people.
All right.
The impact on so on and so forth. So there is a lot for the contemporary Nigerian writer or African writer to think and talk about. But I don't think the book, as in today's world, is able to capture with a lot of rigor what is happening to us.
Isi, let me come to you, but briefly, give your answer in a brief way so that we could get other people to also continue the discussion. We always hear that the personal conflict between Ojukwu and Gowon was at the center of the war, that it could have been prevented if the two characters were not in so much a conflict. But Achebe wrote in his book that the war was inevitable, even if Ojukwu was not the person leading. Do you agree, and did you get the sense that it was a true picture of things from the book?
Yes, I completely agree, with Achebe. From the outset, myself, I think I was about 5 years old or so when that war started. And even though I saw a little of the war. I saw much of that war, and I can still remember as much as I can. But I think, from my research and what I found, Achebe is profoundly correct. Even if you had taken off Colonel Ejiogu and Gowon from the scene and left every other thing that happened intact, I think that war could have still, been fought. And as a matter of fact, perhaps, it could have been fought, in a different way. It could have probably ended up, in a different way, if you had taken out those personalities. But I think in Achebe's perspective there is right on mark.
Ike, let me ask you, in your review, you stayed away from the controversial topic, which was the issue of Awolowo's role in the war. Why did you make that decision, and what do you think about what was written about Awolowo in the book?
I didn't shy away. Before I wrote my review, I made a point not to read anything about the book, not to read any previous reviews, not to read it, So in fact, some friends got in touch, said, "Oh, I want to discuss this," and I said, "No, I've been asked to write a review, and I want to just read the book, write what I feel about it before." So I didn't know there was a controversy about Awolowo until after my review had been published. So that was the starting point. But what I did say, it wasn't just Awolowo. He was scrupulous in the book in naming various people who he felt had played instrumental roles in the war that he felt required censure. And I said that in the book. I didn't bother to name them because I didn't think it was particularly necessary or helpful. I think the controversy of Awolowo is interesting because in the book, in a lot of what he says, he actually quotes, Awolowo verbatim, and I think that's part of where people who started complaining didn't realize that actually in the book some of this stuff is actually referenced and it's actually, verbatim quote. And, you know, in other bits, it's his assessment or his view of a player in Nigeria's history in the same way that Achebe is a player in history, and I think he's entitled to that view. And I don't think it should be something that people should seek to suppress. You know, I actually think that a degree of honesty in our conversation as a nation is a mark of maturity, rather than people hiding things. You know, I think of it as a marriage or a relationship. If there are lots of things that about your partner or your spouse that irritate you or that you feel hurt by and you're not able to talk to them about it, then, you know, what sort of relationship do you have? And I think that applies to a country as well.
Yeah, I need to, Rudolph, let me add something, you know, because to what you had just said and what the question you asked.
Okay.
Look, Achebe observed in this book that Awolowo was driven by the ambition to upstage the Igbo and kind of place his own nationality, the Yoruba, and use it as a kind of pedestal to achieve his ambition. It's actually very true, you know, because there was some other thing I read somewhere of an angry response by somebody who said he served with Awolowo in Gowon's cabinet, to the point that there was a convocation address that Awolowo gave at the University of Ife. They prepared a speech, but when he got there, he threw away that speech and then gave his own, which Gowon was there in the audience, and he castigated the Gowon about the census and all whatnot. Look, it was at that point in time that Awolowo realized that the ambition that he had sought, you know, that gave him the cause to play his role, the role he played in the war, was unraveling, you know. So he kind of, came up, you know, and then and started, you know, to see the enemy as Gowon and as the Hausa Fulani, you know. So look, Achebe's book and the views and the issues that he raised in this book are very, very durable, factual views. And people who are knocking at them, I just don't take them seriously because they cannot knock them down.
Okay, let me go to Ikhide. Ikhide, I want to ask you, when do we get to the point where the story or the history of the Biafra, the Civil War, could be taught in schools in Nigeria? Why is it not happening now?
Well, I'm neither, to Ike's viewpoint earlier, I'm neither an optimist or a cynic. I have been raised in my middle passage to be practical. I have reflected on the situation in much of Black Africa, and I have come to the conclusion that a lot of what we do is mostly academic. That for good or for bad, Africa is on a certain trajectory, and we don't seem to be in control of it. If you take, for instance, the educational system in Nigeria, forget the Civil War, there is nothing of substance in terms of history that is being taught in our curriculum. Nothing, zero. You can go to any of those classrooms and you'll be shocked, especially the public school systems, at what is not being taught in those schools. I think that it is not enough to talk about these things. It is not enough to have structures in place. What is really, really missing in all of this is just leaders of character and stature to implement these things. And my fellow middle class folks, my fellow intellectuals and the political elite are very, very culpable in what is happening to generations of children. I came across a 35-year-old man the other day who had heard very little of Biafra. He lives in Nigeria. That's awful. That's just awful. And so I have, in my writings, I tell people, you should not wait for my generation to teach you anything. Let Google be your friend. You know, Google Biafra and your search will almost come to crash from all of that information. Go anywhere, even Wikipedia, you could find this stuff. But you raised a good point. There has to be a structured way of teaching, not just history, of teaching anything in Nigeria. And this is what is dangerous. We are getting to a point now, thanks to the walls coming down, where nations will begin to say any product of any educational institution in Nigeria will not be acceptable to us for various reasons. Some of it will be safety, some of it will be security, and some of it which will be, quite frankly, that these graduates are not graduates by any measure of common sense. So the short answer is this: just do it. Just do it. Get good books and put them in the hands of these children and teach them. Professor Achebe just showed that there's a huge hunger for these kinds of learnings out there. I cannot tell you how many books I have been forced to buy for youngsters who call or text me and say, please get me a copy of this book. It's a good thing, but it's also very frustrating that even as my colleagues send their children abroad for good education, they cannot look inside the classrooms with any conscience and say what is happening to them will not be allowed to happen to pigs in a pigsty in the Western world.
All right, Ike, let me come back to you because a memoir is supposed to highlight a section of someone's life and how that incident changed the life of the person. Did you notice in reading the book any change in the life of Achebe by the incident he narrated, which is the personal history of Biafra? And also, reading the book, is there any change that happened to you in your understanding of the Biafran story?
In relation to the first, I think actually I didn't get a sense that, you get a sense that Achebe was deeply hurt, deeply scarred by this experience of having been, a young professional keen to participate in building, this new country, Nigeria, and deeply hurt and scarred by what he saw as the really horrible things that had happened to him and his people. But actually, what I find most moving is, as Ikhide says, is that he, in spite of that hurt and that pain, in the later bits of the book, you actually find that he rededicates himself to his role as a man of literature in a developing country, to be on the side of the oppressed, of the poor. He actively engages in politics, joining the People's Redemption Party. And, and I think that's one of the tragedies of the way the book is being interpreted and read, because if you read that book, it is clear that Achebe is deeply invested in Nigeria and in the Nigerian project. And whether that, in relation to the second part of your question as to whether reading the book changed very much for me, it didn't, because like I said, this was stuff I knew already. The Biafra part of the book was things that my grandparents and family friends and people, I've been hearing those stories for 40 years. There was nothing new in the Biafran part of the book for me. What I really enjoyed and wish I had had a bit more of was actually the insights into his growing up, his personal relationships, his friendships. But, he was very abrupt with some of that.
Okay, we have like 5 more minutes. I wish we'd really have enough time to get deep into most of the stories in this book. But let me come to you, Isi. Isi, I want to know, at the end of the book, Achebe offered several solutions. But one of them is like, we should look at the Mandela example and maybe aspire in Africa for that kind of leadership. Do you see that as something possible in the Nigeria of today?
Well, look, I don't know whether you saw the op-ed piece, the comment piece that Achebe did a week after the book was released in the Manchester Guardian. That, I think, is actually the conclusion of that book, not exactly the conclusion that you have in that book. The conclusion that you have in this book is unrealistic because as far as I'm concerned, it's a burnt out case. I'm using the Graham Greene kind of concept. It's a basket case. You cannot redeem it. It's irredeemable. The other thing I needed to go and read that piece that Chebe wrote in the Manchester Guardian a week after the book was released. The other thing I needed to mention quickly is that, look, the question that you raised, why is it that Biafra is not taught in Nigeria? Nobody has answered it. Perhaps, I don't know whether Ikhide is, kind of reluctant to answer that question because the way he answered it doesn't actually answer the question. The Nigerian state is all out to suppress Biafra for a motive. And that's why Biafra is not taught in the school. That's why, because they want to wish Biafra away. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen.
All right. Let me go to. We're rounding up now because we're short of time. But I want to ask Ikhide. Let me ask you. In general, the book covered a period of time. But one of the things that I was touched reading the book is that Achebe's generation, the middle class, they missed a chance. They did not see that the country that they were heaping their hope on was unstable. I'm wondering, do you think that a similar thing is happening today? Are the middle class in Nigeria missing a chance? Or are they not seeing that there is still structural problems in Nigeria that could blow up the dreams of today?
Absolutely. Let me just say this. When Ejiogu asserts that perhaps there is a concerted effort to suppress the Biafra story, he's assuming or assigning a certain level of intelligence to my intellectual elite that simply does not exist.
Yep.
What is happening, and this is an equal opportunity robbery of the people, is unfortunate. I mean, you go to all of the Igbo states. If Biafra was going to be successful as an independent state, the behavior of the governors today, the behavior of the intellectuals today over there, tells me basically it would probably have been the same stealing as usual.
It's not true. It's not true.
Well,
it's not true.
It's
not true. Let me give you a response.
Issy, let him finish. Issy, let him finish.
Who put them in power?
Issy, let him finish.
Or Abuja?
Issy, let him finish. When he's done, you can talk. You can. Okay.
I think that we again, I talked about starting from a position of facts. The facts are this: something horrible happened with Biafra. The fact is this also, that when you look at today's Nigeria, the Igbo are leading a very vibrant life. They are, they are in commerce. They are in our politics. Their leaders are just as good as thieves as leaders from everywhere else. So, we can say all these are not things to say. The truth of the matter is there is a collective there's a collective insularity by my generation of intellectuals and leaders. And it is nice for us to make all of these nice statements, but none of us that I know of as kids in that mess called Nigeria. None of us is in that country. The truth of the matter is there is a new Nigeria for good or for bad. And, Achebe properly situates what happened. But where we are failing is looking at where we are today and where we are going to be down the road. There will never be the black and white that we talk about, the Igbo, the Hausa, the Yoruba, it is going to be a myth in another 50 years. And we don't have much control over that. We just need to sit down and be practical and talk about these things, rather than engage in what I view for many people on all sides as grandstanding that doesn't move us one bit.
All right.
I'll give you a quick response.
Issy, we have about 1 minute left.
In politics, there's what you call, responsiveness. Okay, when you put somebody in power, just like American people put Obama in power through their vote, Obama is going to be responsive to them. Okay. In the case of the so-called Igbo governors of, in Igbo land, The Igbo people did not put them in power. Abuja put them in power. And they are only going to answer to Abuja. So you do not even use them to say, look, the Igbo land or whatever, would have been what it would be like if Biafra has succeeded. No, it's not true.
Okay.
So put that aside.
Easy, that's okay. Thank you.
There have been 2 episodes in the history of Igbo land when foreign troops traversed Igbo land, and each time it devastated the leadership that we have in Igbo land.
Okay.
That was in 1900, 1904, and then, 1967 and 1970.
Okay,
what
please.
you're seeing there today, those people who are imposed on the Igbo people as governors.
We really have to. We really have to go.
Igbo land would be under Biafra.
We have to go because we are short of time. We are really out of time. Let me go and give Ike the last word. Ike, so do you think the whole discussion around this book is good for Nigeria, and do you expect more books on Biafra to be published by maybe the actors who played a role in it?
There are already hundreds of books on Biafra. All you need to do is read the damn books. There are tons of books by all of the actors, including, by the way, a particularly terrible book by Mr. Olusegun Obasanjo. All you need to do is, and I'm happy to send out bibliographies or references for folks. We've got, if you do a Google search, you've got hundreds of books out there, very good books, and some, quite frankly, awful books. So
all right.
We have a museum on the Civil War. So we've got the Jewish Holocaust has 254 museums dedicated to it all over the world. In Igbo land, we don't even have one credible museum, and people are going around saying this happened. If they're upset about it, they have a very strange way. It's my point.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ikhide. Thank you, EC. Ike, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted you to have the last word. So what do you think about the whole discussion about Biafra? Do you think it's helping, or that it's actually making things worse?
I think it's important. It's an important conversation to have. I think something that people have missed out in the book as well is that the Achebe Foundation carried out a lot of interviews with many of the key players in Nigerian political history. And I'm really looking forward to the publication of those interviews because they seem to be very meaty. And, I think, as Ikhide said, let's have more books. There are already plenty, and let people study the books that have already been published. Let's have an informed conversation and an informed debate, and that's how we can move forward to the future.
All right. Thank you so much. I really want to thank Ikhide. I want to thank Dr. Anya, and I want to thank Ejiogu for joining me today. You are welcome for your role in this program, and we will continue this discussion, and hopefully we could start another segment sometime down the road where we'll get more voices involved in this. But I thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.
All right. When we come back, we are going to talk about Biafra, because on November 5th, a group called the Biafran Zionist Movement declared a state of Biafra, and 500 members and supporters were arrested in Enugu. So we're going to talk to activists, and we are going to talk to Dr. Oguchi Nkwocha and Ojukwu's brother on this show. So stay tuned, and we will continue this discussion. And down the road, we are going to take your Skype calls. I know many of you are interested in joining this discussion. We are going to get you involved, and you will talk to us, and we'll share views about what we've been discussing. So stay with us.